Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. This is Counterclipping Show number 102 for December 12th, 2022. My voice is still a little rough, so once again, we are having a different kind of malt beverage tonight. This is a generic American IPA, and it tastes exactly like a generic American IPA. So it's all good. We are clipping Rome Inc. This is a relatively recent release from Against the Odds magazine, and it looked pretty neat. It is a Charles S. Roberts Awards winner. I will have a little bit of news about that in just a couple of minutes. Tonight's topic is the best of victory games. And this is going to be one of those where there's exactly 50 entries on the list. So we will be able to go through all of the stuff, including a couple of the really low rated or unrated things that are just like scenarios. We will be brief when it comes to those things. So this is a one counter sheet game. It looks pretty interesting. Solitaire game designed by Philip Jelly or Philip Gellet. I'm not sure where Mr. whoever, however his pronounces his name is from. So we're going with that. So like I said, it looks pretty neat. So we'll remind everyone to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more wargaming content. We got a whole slate of these things planned over the next few weeks, in addition to the usual other stuff. So stack these up here. We're going to be able to get this all. The goal, anyway, is to get this entire thing into one half of one standard GMT counter tray. We won't be using the standard Against the Odds box for this because those are not very good in terms of counter storage, unless you store them flat, but I'm not going to do that. So if I sound a little nasal or a little throaty, I've spent the last 2 hours, most of the last 2 hours talking, and I'm going to spend the next 2 hours talking. So if that's why the beer tonight. Because if I drank this much scotch, we would have trouble at the end of the show. Remind everybody that super chats are on and available, as Mr. Mullen has just shown us all. Thank you very much, Pat. Pat says best of victory games, Vietnam, but the answer is the Korean War. Advertise the Girth Mission Impossible. We will talk about that actually. Pat is looking for players for a World War II set historical GURPS campaign. So if you want to get in on that action, it sounds pretty neat. I'm going to be playing. If it sounds pretty neat, if it sounds neat to you, then get a hold of Pat. If you don't know how to get a hold of Pat, best place is on Twitter. And if you need email, I'll give you his email. I'm sure he won't mind without asking. Sorry, Pat. So Before we go, so thanks again, Pat. Before we get started, let's say hello to Andrew Frankie, Bill Simone, Block Oddity, Chad Kennedy, Charles Latora, Dale Brady, E4 Airman, Fast Hines, Garrison Venn, Harold Buchanan of the San Diego HistCon team, which just announced their new Summit Award today. We'll talk about that in a second. H. Tuna, Iggy Kriegtall, the legend himself, Fucko, Jeff Beeler, John Stanley, Carl Creeder from the Wargame Bootcamp, Lee Grant, Meandering Mike, Michael Kirk, Michael Simon, Mike Burnett, a lot of Mikes here tonight. Patrick Mullen, Perfidious Albion, Pizza Frenzy Man, The Command Tent, Tim Greenhaw, Tim Zales, Wade Moore, William Aarons, William Boardman, William Bird, and Alistair Logie and Brian Gash have returned to the house as well. So welcome, everybody. Welcome back, and welcome for the first time. If this is your first time stopping by, say hello also to Holden Messerschmidt and Hissy Cat Studios, both of whom have just popped into the chat. So YouTube have never done this. YouTube has like this thing where you can see the chat participants. But if they haven't chatted for more than, I don't know how long it is, 5 minutes or something like that, then their names roll off. So that's why I sometimes miss people when I am reading from that list. It makes for a smoother viewing experience, but unfortunately, it does mean that I leave some folks out. Mo Romaniak and Patrick of Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials are here. Welcome, folks. Glad to have you. So let me get the ticker going, which has been updated. The link in the ticker to the Discord server is live right now. So if you want to get in on the Ardwulf Lair Discord server, which is picking up a bit in activity since we have opened it up to everybody, by all means, follow that link. If you have trouble with that or you're watching this later because it's only good for 24 hours, you can email me and I will give you a one-off link to the Discord server. We have to do that, otherwise we'll get spammers and other assorted bozos in there. So earlier today, the San Diego HistCon team announced the winner of their new Summit Award. That winner is Happy Fred Serval for Red Flag Over Paris, which is a very neat looking game about a very interesting topic that I have not had a chance to play yet, because if you'll recall the story, the last time and only time actually I tried to figure it out was after I had eaten like 2 pounds of beef. And I think there might have been scotch involved in that too. And there was no way my brain was absorbing that after playing OCS for 13 hours and then eating 2 pounds of beef and drinking scotch. So sorry to Fred, but the game does look neat. And there is a second printing on P500 available from GMT's website. And I believe the second edition, second printing, will come with some enhancements as well. So, Charles S. Roberts Awards news. You may have heard that the final ballot for the awards year 2021 is closed. That happened at just after midnight on Saturday night, Sunday morning. So hopefully you got your votes in. If not, then it is too late and you will have to wait till next year. We are working on a tabulation of those ballots and preparation of the awards ceremony. There will be a press release with the award winners, of course, in the fullness of time. But you will also have to be the ability to watch Dan's video, which is sounds like it's going to be fairly streamlined this year. So we'll see what happens, and it should be out pretty soon. So the goal is then, after the award winners are announced, to announce the charter and policy and procedural changes that will take effect starting with awards year 2022. So awards year 2022, we mean the awards year that we're giving awards out for, and that happens in 2023, right? So there'll be some changes. They will be announced. Our expectation is that will occur in the first, maybe second week of January. There is some legwork that we need to do in advance of that, and that is in progress. If anybody was interested in that, that is the Charles S. Roberts Award news. So at least the news I'm able to publicly talk about today. That's actually what I spent the last 2 hours talking on the phone about. So, and I'm already sounding, at least I feel like I'm sounding relatively rough. So as we get going here, let's pull up number 50 according to the let me mention the comments. Alistair Logie mentions that he hopes all the good Victor games are extremely rare and expensive, or he'll end up buying them. That's fair. Not all of them are, actually. There's a couple in here that go pretty cheaply, and I'll point those out when I get to them. Harold mentions that Fred's game is very accessible to new recruits. I have no doubt that that's true, just not me in that particular state. The other finalists were, in fact, Atlantic Chase, Nicaea, and No Motherland Without. Were there only four? I thought there were five. I might be thinking of a different award. Oops, that's troublesome. That is entirely plausible. I have Atlantic Chase and Nicaea and No Motherland Without, actually, and they are all excellent. The worst thing I have to say about No Motherland Without is it's so red. I understand why it is red. That makes complete sense given the thematic topic of the game, but it's very red. So, but the game's pretty neat, actually, and I think if you look at it, you'll have to agree that it is not really like anything else. Um, so, and as we'll talk about, William Bird and a couple other people actually have mentioned that Compass is working on, and exactly where they are with this process, I'm not sure. They are working on a new edition of Tokyo Express, as well as a new volume of the Carrier series. Carrier Battles Philippine Sea should be out pretty soon, actually, and I'm pretty excited about that. But we'll talk about all that stuff in due course. So let's get started. I've got they're mixed in with the Avalon Hill stuff. I don't have that many Victory games. I've had a few others pass through my hands over the years. So I do not consider myself anything resembling an expert on this topic. But I have opinions. Why do I need to be informed about my opinions? Now, like I mentioned, there are exactly 50 games here. So let's start with number 50, working our way up from the top, the bottom, I should say. This is Traffic Control, and it is an ambush scenario that appeared in Victory magazine, which was Victory Games house organ magazine that lasted a few issues. Not sure how many without looking at it. I never owned a copy. I did occasionally buy the General back in the day, but I'm not sure I ever even actually saw a copy of the Victory Games magazine on a shelf. It didn't last long. It got folded into the General pretty early on. So I don't have much to say about this. It is designer Paul Fasselt, artist John Butterfield, and it is an ambush scenario. Now, you might ask, as seems to come up when we base our sort of we build on BGG as our platform for this stuff. Um, why does this have its own entry on BGG when not every random ASL scenario does? That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know that there's a good answer for that. That's a great question. Um, so number 49, I'm not going to read the numbers off, is the legendary Victory Games release, Sexual Q&A. The designer is apparently Alan Smithy on this. Nobody will admit to having designed this from Avalon Hill, but as we'll see as we go here, there are a couple oddballs in here, right? And this is certainly one of them. This is some kind of sexual card game, like a sexual trivia game, authenticated by Dr. Ruth Westheimer. We'll get to Dr. Ruth in a minute. Until we got to Victory Games, there was precisely zero chance of us talking about Dr. Ruth on this show, and yet here we are. So, David Imperato, welcome back to the stream. Aaron Dennis, welcome back. Anybody else I'm missing? Hopefully not. Hopefully not. So 4.0 seems a bit low according to Pizza Frenzy Man, which is it's actually probably a little bit high. On the other hand, if we look at like the number of people that own this thing, where did you even find that? Only 4 people will admit to owning this particular product, which I think is also not a giant shock. Other than that, other than making cracks at this game's expense, I have nothing to say about it. Next up is yet another in the vaunted Victory Games sex line, Sex Quest, also by Alan Smithy, and that nobody will admit to having done. This is a provocative and outrageous adult card game authenticated by Dr. Ruth Westheimer. Players respond to actual situations and questions as fielded by Dr. Ruth on her radio talk show. Okay, I believe Dr. Ruth is still alive, by the way. 8 people. Apparently, this is better because 8 people admit to owning it, and it is a scintillating 4.5 on 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 the BGG rating scale. So definitely an area movement game that is entirely possible. Oh yes, Charles Lectora has won the day on this particular question. Yep, no real opinions on this. Here's another one, another gem from the Victory Games catalog. Several people who are involved in Victory Games are probably outraged right now that I'm starting with this stuff. Playboy, the game of elegant lifestyles. Designer Robert Kern, artist Rosaria Baldari, Ted Kohler, and James Talbot. Of those three names, you may recognize Ted Kohler. Now, because I'm curious, what else has Robert Kern been responsible for? Just this. This may have been the end of his game design career. Sorry, Robert. Um, is this also endorsed by Dr. Ruth? I don't believe that is. Victory Games take on the classic Parker Brothers game careers. We're not looking at the pictures. We only check this BGG page for the articles, as you know. So moving up, this is a game I actually remember. Okay, I don't know that I remember any of the previous products that we've covered so far. This is called "Look at the Schmuck on That Camel," designed by Wilbur Pierce, and I believe this is a card game. It is a card game of Yiddish trivia. Um, so if you're really curious about Yiddish trivia, then this is the game for you. This is possibly the only game for you. I don't know. Yiddish is a lovely language filled with colorful idioms and lots of words that it has loaned to English. So so yes, I agree. We are going to have to we're going to have to question Mark very closely about this particular period of Victory Games. Other than the topic, which I think is a bit narrow interest, a bit niche, if you will. This was probably neat. As a fun card game. Now we get into something that you could call a war game. Now, again, I'm not sure why I understand why this is its own product. I don't know that this was sold independently. Maybe it was. This is the Gulf Strike Second Edition update, and as we'll see, Gulf Strike had two editions, and then like a Desert War update or Desert Storm update, um, that made it extremely popular around the time of Desert Storm. Um, so this is Jeff Beeler mentions that this is why we will not see a Ukraine war game for a while. The order of battle is a moving target. That's true, and I expressed that concern to a couple of designers who were interested in making a game on the conflict in the Ukraine, and I'm like, I mean, okay, but where are you going to get the info from? I don't know that I'd trust a lot. What are you going to do? Get your info from Twitter? I mean, Ukraine is definitely winning on Twitter, but I don't. I'm a little less convinced that they're winning elsewhere. I hope they are. Don't get me wrong, but certainly they're winning the PR side of the war. And this is probably the same type of thing, right? 16-page scenario up booklet operational map D and 130 counters. So there's a half a counter sheet in this thing too. Um, we are not yet into games that are actually ranked as opposed to rated on BGG, by the way. So none of the stuff we have covered so far has enough votes to get a ranking. This is the game of good cooking designed by Michael E. Moore. Probably not the same Michael Moore that you may be familiar with, although hell, maybe it is. Who knows? Um, and I think you have to look at this and think to yourself, is this like an Avalon Hill thing rather than a Victory Games thing? Because Avalon Hill did this kind of game, right? Victory Games was more core war games, and I'm pretty sure the Dr. Ruth stuff came out during Mark's tenure there. But there was a period during which Victory Games wasn't a real company anymore. It was just kind of a label that Avalon Hill sometimes put on games. I'm not sure when that period started or when it ended, and therefore not how long it lasted either. But um, the I will let you make your Michael Moore cracks in the chat. That's okay. Um, yeah, you gotta nip that corner a second time. I did not do the swish clip. Um, But yeah, no idea. We're still in the unrated stuff. Here's Dr. Ruth's Game of Good Sex. Now, this is a 4.9 and unrated on the BGG ranking system. And maybe that's good because if they had to rank it, what category would it go in? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure I want to know. Designer Jerry Gleichenhaus, Michael E. Moore, and Dr. Ruth Westheimer. This is probably, and I'm not checking, her only BGG credit. I think that's entirely plausible. Um, Artists include Ted Kohler, Harold Krieger, Michael Moore, James Talbot, Ted Kohler. I'll pull Ted up here. Won 4 Charles S. Roberts Awards for Best War Game Graphics between 1984 and 1988 while working for Victory Games, which include Vietnam, Pax Britannica, Korean War, and Lee versus Grant. And he's got 52 credits here. So this is why I say you may recognize Ted's name. I don't have a lot to say about Dr. Ruth here, other than making fun of it. It's just it's a weird thing, but it wouldn't have been entirely out of character as an Avalon Hill product, right? So why it landed with Victory Games, I don't know. Maybe that's the magic of Mark Herman that ran into Dr. Ruth at a cocktail party or something, and they struck this deal. That is my working theory. John Madison asks, when do the Charles S. Roberts Awards get announced to the public? As soon as the presentation is ready. It won't be months, however. The intention, I don't want to give you the exact date in case we miss it, but it should happen before the end of the month. So, all right, moving on from Dr. Ruth. Here's Ted Kohler. I just pulled that up. Desert Shield, a Gulf Strike expansion module. And this is, I think, the update that I mentioned earlier to Gulf Strike. It's exactly what it sounds like, right? Desert Storm starts, and then or Desert Shield starts, and then it turns into Desert Storm, or Desert. Yeah, that's exactly how it started. So this is Desert Shield. Where are we at with this thing? Trying to figure out where we're at. All right. Well, there's a bunch of markers with Roman numerals on them. That's all I know. Oh dear, we're totally gonna get demonetized about this. Let's not get demonetized. There is the game voted most likely to get me demonetized is coming up this evening, by the way, and it is not this. So moving on, Leatherneck. This is an expansion for Battle Hymn. Designer Joseph Reeser, Eric Lee Smith, artist Ted Kohler, James Talbot. This isn't. So it's what it sounds like. It is an expansion for Battle Hymn. And we'll get to Battle Hymn later on, but just so you know, and this did come in a box. I want to say it was a 1-inch box. Victory Games also did half-inch boxes, but I don't recall that they released any war games in half-inch boxes. They did, and we'll see at least one or two of these things related to this line in a minute. They did release some role-playing modules for the James Bond game in half-inch boxes with no lids. They were half-inch boxes that were open and shrink wrapped. It was a weird presentation model, I think we can say, and not something that anybody else has ever even tried to do. Silver Star. This is Ambush. This is one of several Ambush expansions, a related system. Designer on this is Paul Fasselt. Artist, nice cover too. I got to say, I think that's a pretty striking cover. I think I won't surprise anybody by saying that we're going to land on number one here, and it's going to be Ambush. And I think that's reflected in the number of Ambush products that we are going to see. So this, I believe, is GIs in Italy. Third and final expansion, 6 new scenarios, and don't forget that a scenario in Ambush has a fair amount of replayability. So that's true. Take place in Italy, designed to be challenging for experienced Ambush characters. And if you look at the maps on these things, this is just one map section, I guess, but color palette is, I think, not up to modern standards. Somebody also mentioned, I think I said this, that the Dr. Ruth Game of Good Sex was the best-selling Victory Games title of all time. So what does that mean? Well, it probably means just that it sold outside the war game market. So, and Dr. Ruth was a big deal at that point. I remember when GURPS came out, reading I believe GURPS 3rd edition book, and they give you examples of like fame in different fields, right? This is a famous general. A famous general might have a fame of 3. And they said that this is the actual example in the book. The only scientists with a fame of four are Carl Sagan and Dr. Ruth Westheimer. So, sniper, we're going to get a lot of Dr. Ruth correct. Maybe I should have left it out, actually. Next up is Purple Heart for Ambush. And we're still in the unrated stuff, but these are expansions, so I'm not sure if they are even counted for that. Joseph Reeser, Ted Kohler again involved in the art, and the box cover art I think is pretty nice. Looking at the counter sheets, we're going to see, I think, and we'll all highlight some examples. You've got a mix of half-inch and what looks like 5/8 inch counters here. These aren't really particularly atrocious counters. I mean, when was this? 88, 85. So we can't really be particularly surprised. Left of all comments to leave up for 10 minutes. The Yes, but Einstein was dead at the time. So, um, so moving on. Here is Move Out for Ambush. This is four new missions to the Solitaire Squad Combat Original. This one again, Joseph Reeser or Reiser is probably how I'd pronounce that, but I'm thinking it's maybe Germans. We got some cards in here with pretty nice art on the cards too. Now these are going to be I'll point this out. These are going to be the Avalon Hill style cards where they come in a perforated sheet and you punch them out of marginally heavy matte finish stock. This is not the kind of production value that I think people would appreciate nowadays. In fact, it's one of the two reasons, other than preferring the unmounted map over the mounted map, that I switched to a copy of Freedom in the Galaxy that was from SPI as opposed to Avalon Hill. I don't necessarily prefer a unmounted map over a mounted map. But that particular mounted map from Avalon Hill was a bad mounted map, bad warping problems, never laid flat. I would just as soon in that scenario have an unmounted map. What did the William Bird ask for what these retailed for originally? Maybe $20, something like that. That sounds right. I'm guessing, but I mean that sounds right. Ooh. Tabletop's Edge. First of all, Doug, welcome back. Found someone who was doing modern, full color, updated cards for Ambush on Etsy. Reasonable price, very nice quality. So if you're a huge Ambush fan and want to get rid of those cards, or if your original Ambush cards are absolutely wrecked, John C. from the sunny Philippines. I didn't see your name until just now. Sorry for not giving you a shout out earlier. Thanks for stopping by. Yeah, so if you want to replace your old absolute, and these things did not wear well if you played these games multiple times, I can tell you that. How much attention I was paying attention to war games at the time, but what I saw was what I saw, and during most of that period, during which I was, maybe not even a teenager in the first part of it, SPI was already dead, right? So we only saw the TSR SPI stuff and Avalon Hill, which seemed to be booming at the time. Okay, so now we're going to get into a string of James Bond 007 RPG themed board games, and this is the first of those. This is and they're all based on specific things in the movies, right? Their adventures were like this too. There was a Goldfinger adventure. I've actually heard really good things about them, about the James Bond 007 adventures. I never played or owned any of them, however. I did own a couple of accessories for that. And the game's actually, I think, somewhat underrated, but it's never going to get redone because you got a licensed James Bond now and it's going to cost $2 million. Clark Commando 1983, welcome back to the show. Good to have you, Mark. If you haven't seen it, another little piece of wargaming news tidbits here. Dan, the dancing man over at No Enemies Here, is doing his Grog of the Year contest, whatever it is. And you go to that specific video and you nominate and vote for people in the comments. Don't vote for me. I have nominated Mark Ruggiero, Clark Commando 1983. I suggest you all do the same. He gets my endorsement for Grog of the Year for this year. So so this is on one of these action episode games. I have no idea what that even means. But we do have some pictures, and we got this point-to-point movement map. It kind of looks like a race game. Other than that, I don't know much about it. Next up is A Nightmare on Elm Street by Robert Ryer. This is another one of those things that doesn't really seem to fit comfortably. The Q manual was really cool. This doesn't seem to fit particularly comfortably in the rest of Victory Games' product line, which remember was not only war games, but by and large was pretty groggy, hardcore war games. Right? We're gonna. I mean, you wouldn't know it from what we've seen so far, but we will absolutely start to see that. So this is a board game based on the movie Nightmare on Elm Street, and it's got this maze like track or something like that. And is I think a little bit gaudy, but it's Nightmare on Elm Street, so I don't know what you possibly would want other than that. Here is the Live and Let Die action episode game. With who did the cover? Was it James Talbot that did the covers on these? I want to say that's the case. And by and large, I think these are really good covers. So at the time, remember, we'd only seen, well, most people had only seen two James Bonds, and there had only been three: Roger Moore and Sean Connery. George Lazenby was in there, and I had seen that maybe later than this, but I had seen On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which, by the way, is a pretty underappreciated James Bond film. So is court Meandering Mike says he voted for Jack Rady. Certainly Jack deserves honors. I'll certainly agree to that. Is Coruscant Pocket 2 done? Is it shipping? Because I hadn't heard that, which doesn't mean it isn't. It just means I hadn't heard that. I know it's been close for some time. I believe that boat does jump the shark at some point in the movie, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so this is Open Fire. This is solitaire tank combat in World War II, and I think what this is an effort to replicate the magic of ambush for like tank battles instead. Jerry Klug was the designer here. Jerry Klug is a very interesting designer. Has done some very interesting work over the years, which we're not going to go into because not all of it is in the wargaming space. I think I need the backup clipper for this particular one. Corner is eluding me, and I don't want to savage it, so I'd rather be careful. There may have been an expansion for this as well. Inspired by, it even says inspired by Ambush, which makes tons of sense. I mean, I kind of grew up watching James Bond movies, and by and large, they were Roger Moore movies. And I do think some of those Roger Moore movies hold up pretty well, but most of the worst James Bond movies are also Roger Moore movies. So, incidentally, if you don't know, there's another Roger Moore who wrote a lot of material for D&D back in the day. And he's fine as far as I'm aware. But unfortunately, Kim Mohan, who was the editor of Dragon magazine at the time and who published a lot of that material, just passed away apparently either today or yesterday. So for those who remember Kim Mohan, he is no more, and rest in peace to him. I hate to lose these folks. Let me put it that way. You know what I'm saying? Royce says For Your Eyes Only does not hold up. Well, I haven't seen it in probably 20 years, to be honest. I remember liking it at the time, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe the girls were hot in there or something. I don't know. I wouldn't have been of a mature disposition at the time. Let me put it that way. Here's The Man with the Golden Gun, an action episode game, and this looks like it's some kind of like duel type of arrangement. Actually, mechanically these things might be interesting. Here's somebody selling a good copy for $10 or a like new copy for $48. Another Jerry Klug design. And I want to say Jerry Klug was the primary designer of the James Bond role-playing game, which these aren't an RPG, but they tie into their pretty big line for this. A lot of James Bond movies are quite campy now, especially the Roger Moore ones and the Pierce Brosnan ones. Here's the one that you knew was coming, the Goldfinger one. Rank overall 18,652 at 5.9. So not exactly well regarded these days. But then again, 100 people, BGG says 109 people own this. Like I said, I never owned any of these things, and there's a whole pile of them. It was a very successful product line at the time. I mean, there's probably some truth to that. I mean, there is some information content in the BGG ratings and in the BGG rankings, where folks may make a mistake, and I don't know that anybody here is doing that. Um, uh, is kind of inferring more information into those numbers than is actually there, right? Like assuming that because this game is ranked number 70 and this game is ranked number 90, that the game at 90 is not as good as the game at 70. And I do not believe that those are safe assumptions to make. Holden Messerschmidt asks which Bond has the best intro song. I'm going to vote for Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger on that. There have been some other good ones as well. Okay, Central America. I hope that we are well into the meaty war games segment at this time. Central America by James H. McQuaid. Striking cover. Not really, as we'll see here, not really a bad looking game. This is the map, and I mean it's got that sort of very 80s victory games color palette and style in that the terrain is like whole hex color. That is a technique that has fallen out of favor now. Royce says if someone's looking for This War of Mine, eBay $28, free shipping. That's a real deal. I have no information about that game whatsoever. View to a Kills. The Sheena Easton for Your Eyes Only theme is pretty good too. Live and Let Die is good too. Certainly not my favorite Paul McCartney piece, but I got to tell you. Andrew Frankie says that Central America is an underappreciated game. Um, I think I'm going to agree with that to a point. Um, so this is like then modern conflict in Central America with things like guerrillas and insurgents and all that stuff. Okay. And I suspect, without doing the legwork, I suspect that folks might find this game's handling of those particular sides of this conflict to be a bit unsatisfying nowadays. Um, on the other hand, it is a straight up war game on those topics, and some other folks might value that. And they're not necessarily wrong. These are the backs of the counters. Do we have the fronts of the counters? Come on, give me some counter fronts here, BGG. What are you doing? Dying here. Dying on camera. Here's one of the front sheets. And these counters, I think some of these counters are actually, I think, quite decent. The some of the air counters, for example, are okay. I think there's some contrast issues. I think I see some center nibs, which I always hate. The ground units have those tiny NATO symbols. That's not a graphical style I favor nowadays either. I mean, we're making fun of a game. We're making fun of a 1987 game here, so it's a little like this is pretty low hanging fruit, right? Um, John Longshore, do not take IP law advice from randos on the internet. So I'm not even going to tell you because you shouldn't do that. Consult an IP attorney if it's important. And besides, this isn't close to 20 years. So not the worst counters I've ever seen by any means, and not the worst counters from Victory Games either. I'll show you those in a minute. But not a bad looking game for its era, I don't think. And I also suspect, as much as we might find some of the mechanics in here dated, I think this is topically fairly interesting, and I would kind of like to see it, and maybe fiddle with it a little bit. But time's a factor. As you can see, it does not go for $1 million either, so you can normally get a copy of this. Don't go to eBay for it, obviously. Here's a guy selling a very good copy for 29 bucks, for example. That's I think, a very reasonable price for this. And I think about the right price for a very good copy, to be honest. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about very good copies and misadventures therefrom at some point. All right. So here is France 1944, the Allied Crusade in Europe. This is a Mark Herman design, art by Ted Koller and James Talbot. And again, I suspect that the innards are Ted Koller and the outards are James Talbot. This is a game that I think has habitually not necessarily been mentioned when folks start talking about the best of the stuff that Victory Games did. And I think like that's maybe a bit of an oversight. This is a game that has certainly has some fans that are very vocal about how great it is. And it was apparently great enough that Compass Games relatively recently redid it. If anybody knows whether the Compass version of France 1944 is still available, put it in the chat, please. I'm not sure, and I don't remember checking for it at Compass Expo. So that game is the same game. I don't know if it was redesigned in any sense, but it was redeveloped by Judd Vance. And one of the things that came the closest to getting me to pick it up was what looked to me like some really, really good development work by Judd on that. New player aids, a whole bunch of other like physical systems enhancements. If you're going to go for this game at this point, my recommendation would be to get the Compass version. Maybe there's some errata. I'm sure it's on the website. Um, this, as you can see, does not go for tons and tons of money either, but it just got redone in the last three or 4 years. I think three is safe. Michael Kirk says dense 65-page rule book. Are we talking about Central America? I believe we are talking about Central America. There, that doesn't scare me off particularly. So, I mean, remember, just because it's 65 pages or whatever doesn't even necessarily mean that it's complicated. The rule book for NATO, the next war in Europe, is like 80 pages. And it's a great rule book, and it's not all that complicated of a game. It's I think it's probably simpler than this. So that's about all I have to say about that. Here's another one that I did have, and I got rid of it, and that was probably dumb. And I'll explain why here in a second. So this is Omaha Beachhead Battle for the Bocage. The interesting feature here is that it is a Joe Balkowski design. Now, why is that interesting? Well, other than Joe was the designer of Atlantic Wall for SPI, which is a pretty influential game. Joe is the official, I believe still the official U.S. military historian of the 29th Infantry Division, which of course you will all know is one of the two divisions that assaulted Omaha Beachhead, right? So that by itself, I think, makes this game worth a peek, right? We're going to take a look at that. The map is, I'm trying to get yeah, I mean, that's a lot, right? That's a lot. That's a lot of red and warm colors. Let's put it that way. But you can also kind of make out the essential features that are going on here. But this is not a visually pleasing map. Now, interestingly, the counters. Are we going to do this again? Oh, apparently we are. I can't pull up every image page, right? So here's the counters. These are roughly 5/8 inch counters. So they're oversized counters with, weird small unit symbols, but they're also, the numbers are pretty easy to read to a degree that a lot of the victory games that I've looked at didn't have. Okay. And, that's saying as much about me as it is about victory games typesetting, because the kinds of games I've owned or looked at or played from victory games are the groggier ones, right? Which with really dense counters and stuff like that. These are entirely readable, in my opinion. So the map is kind of tiring just to look at, but the counters are quite nice, and boy, these will stand out on that map, won't they? This is somebody which has done a 3D map with what looks like foam core board of Omaha Beach. That's pretty cool. So we talked about this last week. We better have another sip here. I'm gonna sound like Clarence Frogman Henry by the end of the show. So Jeff Beeler asks GTS game. I mean, this is all true, but I mean, this is not the precursor to GTS. But we will, in fact, be talking about the precursor to GTS here in this show. which we should get to, before too long. This is Cold War, and I talked about John Prado's game. I talked about this last week on the John Prado's quasi tribute show. And I said at the time, I'm not going to go over absolutely everything I said, but I'll hit the highlights. I said at the time, I owned this back in the early 90s, I want to say, and I did not have a high opinion of it at the time. We did try to play it. I'm not sure we got it right. It's always plausible we screwed it up. Um, this is not a particularly well regarded among the historical simulations that Victory Games did. That said, this is another one of those things that I wouldn't mind taking a peek at nowadays because I suspect, based on the designer, that there's probably something interesting in there, even if maybe the whole game doesn't hang together. As you can see, a plentiful copies on BGG, including this $20 very good copy here in the US, $20 $35 very good copy, $29 very good. So you can get this thing if you're really interested in it. If you want to think of this as a precursor to Twilight Struggle, frankly, I think that is a fair statement. But there's a significant amount of decades of additional thought was put into Twilight Struggle. Let me put it that way, and it leaned on a lot of games that Cold War here was not able to lean on because they hadn't been released or even designed yet. You'll see that it's kind of an area control type of thing. I think that's a fair statement. But honestly, I don't have a particularly clear recollection of this. This was 25 years ago at this point. But I can tell you we didn't particularly care for it. Now, I will point out though that the cards in some of these Victory Point games, I wonder if those are custom cards. I don't remember having an opinion about the card quality at the time. Kevin Top said Callendale did a recent video series on this game. Are we talking about Cold War or one of the previous couple of games? I didn't catch this statement at the time, which is unfortunate. But I'd be interested in seeing Callendale's thoughts on this, to be completely honest. Next up is Shell Shock. This is the 2-player. I want to say this was standalone. I never know. I've never played Ambush. I've never owned any of the Ambush products. I believe this product to be basically Ambush, but it is a standalone 2-player version of Ambush. And as you can see, it's kind of middle of the pack in terms of ratings. Probably the top 50%. Rated almost 2,000 among war games, which is not awesome. 6.4 is not awesome either, but and we can see that Victory Games pretty much typical color palette. Counter sheets are real similar to the Ambush counters, where it's a mix of 5/8 and 1/2 inch counters, with art that it wouldn't surprise me if it was just recycled from Ambush, at least some of it. But if you really love Ambush and you really want to see a 2-player game of it, here you go. Now this should go for a wee bit more than some of the other stuff that we've talked about, but there's a like new copy for $25 on the BGG marketplace. So I should solicit advertisements from people selling stuff on the BGG marketplace at this point. So this is a funny statement. But NATO preceded Cold War by several years. NATO was actually the first game from Victory Games. I didn't know that, and they had a couple releases right around the same time. But I have it from Bruce Maxwell that it was their first game. So Alistair Logie has returned, much appreciated. Roger Hemsath, welcome. Manders, Aaron Davis, welcome. Nice icon you got there, Aaron Davis. Ray Garby, welcome back. Hopefully, I'm catching most folks. Make sure say hi in the chat. At least say hi. That's all you got to say. That way your name goes down in perpetuity on these things. But here's your 2-player Ambush with a middle of the pack rating. So Gulf Strike, the quite successful, by the way, Gulf Strike spawned a companion game, if you will, Aegean Strike. And do I recall if you could link these? I thought you could. A link up scenario is included in Aegean Strike. So this is, modern hypothetical stuff. Remember when Gulf Strike came out, it was modern hypothetical, right? And then it happened. And Pentagon ran out to Mark Herman and said, "Please give us copies of Gulf Strike so we can wargame this situation out that we have not previously wargamed." Um, the we'll talk about we will talk about NATO in a few minutes. I'll get to that. Aegean Strike, I think, is a less interesting situation than Gulf Strike. But I wonder how much of that is the fact that we can now look back at Gulf Strike and say, hey, this, something in this space happened, right? And I frankly think that's a factor, and I think might even be a factor in the ratings. As opposed to some of those, weird games at the bottom of the list. 737 people own Gulf Strike as registered on BGG. Obviously, that's not the number of copies, but it is an interesting thing, and it goes for decent change. I think that $100 like new, I think, is a bit rich. This VG at $30 for a like new at 50 or maybe 60, I think is more reasonable. So I wouldn't pay this, but um, unless you like really need this game, if this is a grail game for you, then do what you got to do, right? Not a bad looking map by the standards of the day, I don't think. Not nice job on the cartography. You can see that there's like a two-level hex grid here, which is also interesting. This I think I imagine Gulf Strike came first, and it may have been the first example of that. I'm not sure. Here's a game that is, I think, underrated and that I would love to see somebody redo. This is Bis Nunez says, in his opinion, the best Victory Games game is Across Five Aprils. I think Across Five Aprils holds up pretty well. Um, and Jeff Beeler points out, this is a good point. Is touching the the occupation of North Cyprus by Turkey in the 1970s. Let me put it that way, since that is a thing I know nothing about. And it almost went kind of hot. So Jason W says that the only Victory Games played was Peloponnesian War. And apparently, it was the GMT version. I'm not sure to what extent the GMT version is different, but we'll talk about Peloponnesian War coming up too. This is the perils of working up from the bottom. So 1809, Napoleon's Danube campaign. This is, in my opinion, one of Napoleon's most fascinating operational campaigns. This is the campaign that includes the battles of Aspern-Essling and Wagram, for example. Very interesting campaign. I am disappointed that this has not been redone, and and I know Jim Ozarski would agree with me here. Um, the Let me get to this. So no, the answer is no, but I'll get to this. This is Yes. So this is part of the campaigns of Napoleon's system, part of the 1X branch of that system. So that is the Kevin Zucker operational Napoleonic system at its most granular scale. Okay. Unless you count the days series as part of that, then that's the lowest. But I think it's 2 or 3 miles per hex, and it probably says here actually because I've been through these listings. Time scale 2 days, map scale 2 miles per hex, and units are divisions and brigades. And in this system, almost all the units, no, actually not almost all the units are kept off map on a display, and you just move the leaders around basically. So that gives you some fog of war effect as well. This is a pretty interesting looking system. I really want to dig more into it. So the I've been told this works. I'm told if you fill the box up with uncooked rice and let it sit for a while, that might help as well. Um, this is one of the games that is on my like to play Napoleonics list, and that's not Lava Tie at this point because that's a thing that we did. This is one of the games that's kind of higher on the things I want to play list because of my strong interest in the campaign, and the fact that it's an unusual map configuration. Is it 3 maps? It's 2.5 maps, and they go together long wise, so they meet at their short edges. Um, this is a pretty interesting looking game. Looking at the marketplace here, This should not go for a mint either. Here's a very good copy for $50. I think that's a little high considering that there's like new copies for 30 on here. So not particularly expensive. I think this game is worth a look. Not to say that it's an unsullied gem necessarily. A lot of additional refinement has happened in this campaigns and Napoleon system since this game came out. And this is one of it's not the first one, but it's an early one. But it is on an interesting campaign, and it presents a pretty interesting opportunity to kind of hit the sort of the Zucker zeitgeist on this, in that you can play this campaign game to get a sense of the campaign, and then play the last success to get a sense of some of the bigger and more important battles in it. And I really like that is a thing we can do. I wish Kevin would redo this. Kevin, if you're watching, please redo this. I would buy it. I would probably buy a copy for somebody else too. I'd love to see this redone with the updated rules and with modern graphics, and I love their current graphical style. So you should be able to get a copy if you're interested in this. You should be able to get a copy for not a ton of money. I think it's worth exploring. Um, and let's look at the map. The map's fine. It looks more like an SPI map, I think, than it doesn't really look like an SPI map, but I think it looks more like an SPI map than a lot of the victory games sort of block color maps that we have seen so far tonight. And then here's one of the off map displays where you keep the leaders. Other games have little pictures of the leaders and stuff like that, but this doesn't give you that. The footprint on this is a little big. It's like I said, it's 2.5 maps, and you put the 3 maps together lengthwise. So that eats a lot of space. But if you have 2 6-foot folding tables, I think you'd be fine. Um, I'm gonna have to investigate that, Mr. Longshore. Very interesting. So I think my answer to this is no. I really can't tell you too much. What I can say is that there are folks, and people make comments on my videos about them, um, about things like the CRT in the Library of Napoleonic Battles, which, if you look at that CRT, it is very similar to the old Napoleon's Last Battles CRT. However, there are additional wrinkles to combat that have been added in the new games that weren't there in Napoleon's Last Battles. So I think that's why I prefer the newer games in the series, the Library of Napoleonic Battles, as opposed to those. Um, in particular, the big complaint about the CRT is that combat is not very attritive. It's a bit bloodless. You might look at it and think that, because there's a lot of retreats and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to do losses. That frankly is it's like that because of the scale of that series is what it is, right? I mean, units are like brigades. They're big units. You're not managing, and they're 20. I've been immersed in Lavatai. Lavatai is 20-minute turns. I want to say Library of Napoleonic Battles is 2-hour turns. So you can, I believe, find a link to the Napoleon's Later Campaigns rules by Marcus Stumpter on VGG. And I'm not saying don't play with those rules. If you like them better, go ahead and play with those. But I haven't been super motivated to investigate that, just because I'm reasonably happy with the rules that came in the box. I think there's reasons to not be. Don't get me wrong. Some people might find that unsatisfying, but the scale is what it is, right? It's the scale that was inherited from Napoleon's Last Battles, and which is why people that are specifically looking for tactical experience are not going to be satisfied with this game. Not this game, but the Library of Napoleonic Battles. This is the operational game. Folks looking for an operational experience aren't going to be necessarily satisfied with the Library of Napoleonic Battles either, because it doesn't have a lot of operational detail either. Stigler, and I'm not saying he's wrong. I kind of think he's right. Made the point that it is definitely an operational game because that's what the scale indicates, and I agree with him. But there's just as much tactical detail in the game as there is operational detail. So which is it? Is it both? I mean, you can try to do both. That's a challenging design task, but it's a thing you can do. We have not yet gotten to Tokyo Express, Mr. Fudpucker, Mick Fudpucker. Sorry, Mr. Fudpucker has been in here before, so I should know that. But in any case, moving on from 1809, pretty good game, I think. This is Flashpoint Golan, the fifth Arab-Israeli war. This is a Mark Herman design. This is part of my general embargo on games about this topic until the BCS game about this topic comes out, and I'll break my rule. And then 2 years later, I will own 60 Arab-Israeli war games. Probably not, but it might be more than that one too. That is my reservation with Arab-Israeli war stuff. It's like I don't have the time to get into another topic. There's plenty of pretty good looking games on the topic. And this is an interesting game. On the strength of it was designed by Mark Herman alone, it's probably worth a look. Also, this is, let's say, challenging terrain to do a pretty map on. Right? I mean, it's mostly desert and some mountains, and some rivers and a coastline. So it's a bit of a challenge to the artist to make this look really super duper pretty. I want to say this is two maps. Is that correct? It doesn't say, but yeah, no, it's two maps. Um, so it's a decent size game. 780 counters too, which is more than two counter sheets. So this looks relatively meaty. I still don't think these are the worst victory games counters I've ever seen. You'll notice in the I think you see this in SPI too. But we saw it in like over the lifetime of victory games where the gutters on the counters to try and adjust for potential registration problems. The gutters on the counters kind of get bigger and bigger, and this is kind of in that space too, right? Where there's a lot of information on that counter. It's not really that much information, which is why I don't think this is that bad. It's all kind of packed into the center of the counter. Not a desirable piece of graphic design, but it may have been a piece of graphic design mandated by necessity of trying to have to replace fewer counter sheets because they came out misregistered from the printer. So that is pretty much all I can say about Flashpoint Golan. Panzer Command, Gateway to Stalingrad. This is by Eric Lee Smith, and it is a game that a lot of folks. I never felt at the time like this game was particularly prominent or or acclaimed or any of that. And that's anecdotal. Maybe it was, but I still don't see people particularly praising this game. And this is one of the most influential war games of that decade. This is the game that brought chit pull to board wargaming at least. There may have been a similar mechanic in miniatures prior to that. We'll talk about the Tokyo Express thing when we talk about Tokyo Express. If you look at this game and then look at GTS, not that it inspired GTS, that's not why it's important. This is the first chit pull board war game. Okay, that's why it's influential. GTS more or less takes this chit pull system and points like command points economy and adapts it to other topics. I have heard wishy-washy things about the game itself, but it's an enormous influence. And I think this is probably a significant part of the problem. Is it's not really a simulation of an event so much as it is a simulation of a situation which surely happened down there, and that sucks a lot of the context and a lot of the flavor out of a game, in my opinion. I think that was probably not a great system, or maybe they should have found a different topic for it, right? Um, I'm not sure whether this predates Tank Leader or not. Tank Leader was from West End Games. So I want to say Tank Leader came out later. Almost certainly came out later. This is 1984. That's quite an early release. Let's prove it. But I believe that ends up being correct. Western Front Tank Leader 86, Eastern Front 86, Western Front 87. So yes, that absolutely is correct. I am actually correct for a change. That is always pleasant. Oh, that's interesting. David Kilson traded his copy to Adam Starkweather when he was doing the first GTS game, which was the Devil's Cauldron, by the way, and it is a magnificent game. Um, yeah, Aaron Dennis says that the counters suck, and they're not great, but I mean there's rather a contrast problem here, at least looking at this photograph or scan. I Boy, there's some numbers on there that are really, really small. While these don't have quite the gutters problem that some victory games counters had, and they're bigger, right? These are not half-inch counters. These are like something like 5/8 inch counters. But despite that, man, some of this stuff's really hard to read. You'll notice that they also use the historical unit symbols here. That is a decision that I think is generally silly, because we're not familiar with those symbols. We're familiar with the symbols that get used in war games, right? Um, in GTS, that's really not much of a problem because everything else you need to know about the unit is coded by either number or color on the counter. So, so whether a particular unit is, did I drop a counter? Yeah, apparently not. Whether a particular unit is a one symbol or another really is immaterial. You go by the the colored box that the movement factor is in, and the colored box that the firepower factor is in, and that tells you how the unit behaves. So in GTS specifically, it is a thing that I can deal with. Um, not all Labatt counters have the script backs. I will say that. And last thing I clipped was Beauchamp, which doesn't have the script and is, insofar as it is possible to really give high playability to La Bataille, Beauchamp does it. Um, as you can see, the map is, it's fine. It's 1984. What do you want? It's not exceptionally hideous, but it's that sort of block hex by hex terrain that it's not really, but it looks like it is. Um, and I'm not a particular fan of that style, but certainly isn't the ugliest thing I've ever seen. Let's put it that way. Here we have Gulf Strike. This is it's something like number 20. Um, this is a Mark Herman design, quite a detailed game as I recall. And it is a two mapper as well with maps end to end. And I think there's an extension, or is that the expansion? That's possible. Looks like we're playing it on a dining room table in this case. So they've got weird space considerations going on, or maybe that's this strategic or operational map that gives you the most of the Indian Ocean. This I've never played this, and I've never owned it, but it's a pretty interesting looking game. As I said before, I think that part of the reason is that you can look at Gulf Strike and say, "Hey, something a lot like this actually occurred," um, which you may not necessarily be able to say with a lot of games that were near future hypothetical games at the time. Also, Mark Herman. Mark Herman is a designer that we should pay attention to when Mark Herman does something as a designer, right? Many innovative ideas have come out of Mark that have changed the face of the hobby, um, which is why he's in the Hall of Fame, right? So, Gulf Strike, like I said, pretty interesting game. What does this go for? Like new copy in Italy for 100 euros, like new copy in the US 125. Those are not prices I would be willing to pay for this product, to be frank. Um, if I could get it, and this is why I do not own a copy of Gulf Strike, by the way. Yes, so this is the game that um, they when the Gulf War broke out, the story Mark's told the story a million times. But the when the Gulf War broke out, the Pentagon had not war gamed that scenario out, and so they needed something and fast because they knew we were going to end up involved because oil. So they ran out to the local hobby store, bought as many stores probably bought as many copies of Gulf Strike as they could, opened the boxes up, saw Mark Herman in there, called up Mark Herman, and had him under contract like the same day or the next day or something like that. And by contract we mean sworn to government secrecy type of thing. So yeah, there's a cool story about this game, and that is the cool story. But it's Mark's story. I'll let him tell it in greater detail, and that is a thing you can find on YouTube, right? So Mark's John Carter game. I owned that back in the day, and I think I was really wanting a John Carter RPG at the time. There is one now from Modifius, and it's nice. Um, and when John Carter game wasn't it, I think I sold it off disgusted, and I'd kind of like to see that again because I bet there's some interesting things happening in that game. Gulf Strike. This is the picture of the one with the edition with the Desert Shield expansion in it. I suspect that's even if it's based on dodgy publicly available intelligence at the time. I think that is the one that you would want. And it's the cover's better too, frankly. All right, Lee versus Grant. This is the Joe Balkowski game, and many consider this with good reason to be the precursor to the Great Battles. The Great Camp. I've been pretty good about not doing that lately, but not perfect. And today we have messed it up. This is the precursor to the Great Campaigns of the American War system, the American Civil War system. This is more about my voice than the amount of beer I've consumed, by the way. GDW's Gulf War fact book also cost them a lot when copies got returned from the booksellers to GDW in an unsaleable condition. So there we go. I'd be happy to paw through it a little bit. Like I said, I'd be curious to see it. I ain't paying $125 for it, though. That's out of the question. I think this is an overstatement. I don't think this is the first game in the GCACW series, but it does have a lot of similarities. The scale's different. There's a number of other things that are different here. I think this is if you're really into GCACW, I think this is worth a look. And this is, but the other thing is that this is the Overland campaign, and we've got that in GCACW. And if you don't have that, it's coming back soon. So, I think the ideas here are achieve greater success in GCACW, right? They're not the same mechanics. They're very similar mechanics, and you can see that you can see the progression going from this to Stonewall a couple of years later, well, maybe not much later, to Stonewall Jackson's Way, which is the first game in the GCACW or GCACW series. I had to second guess myself there just to make sure I wasn't getting it wrong again. So I think the statement that it's the first game of GCACW, I think is an overstatement, but it's definitely a proto GCACW. I think that's accurate. You'll definitely also see let's say similarity in the counter mix here. You've got some stuff that you wouldn't see in a GCACW game, but you got some stuff like the organization value markers, which you absolutely would. And here's the leaders. You'll see abbreviated array of numbers on these leaders compared to GCACW, where you'd get at least a couple of numbers for leaders at this level. But like I said, it's an interesting looking game. The map's not bad. I think this is a reasonably good looking Civil War map for, the fact there's a lot of woods kind of helps, right? A lot of uglier maps in this particular era. So Lee versus Grant. Let's look at the what the marketplace landscape looks like for this. Somebody had a copy of this on the flea market table at Compass Expo, but it had loose counters in the box, and there is nothing that will prevent me from buying a game faster than counters loose in the box, like all the counters loose in the box. That is not a way to store your games. Here's a $40 like new copy. Again, you're interested in this. I think this is probably a little less detailed than that might not be true. Than GCACW is what I was going to say. I'm not convinced. As soon as I said it out loud, I lost confidence that was correct. Callendale's done some stuff on this, so check that out if you want to. You can see that best wargaming graphics winner. Best pre-World War II winner as well of the Charles S. Roberts Awards back in 1988. So pretty interesting looking game, and I think historically, I think this is a very interesting game in terms of the development of that system. Mosby's Raiders, Eric Lee Smith. This is guerrilla warfare in the Civil War. This is one I don't know very much about, also, but it kind of looks interesting. It is a point to point map. Eric Lee Smith is another one of those designers, frankly, that I think wasn't really prominent in the board wargaming hobby for a while, but really important as a designer. And so I think that's probably why this is worth looking at more than anything else. It's also got quite a good cover. And I want to say this is a James Talbot cover. I don't know if you could tell, but that's James Bond riding that horse. But interesting looking game. And again, it's a game about guerrilla warfare in the Civil War too. So it's a topic that's not really all that well covered. Um John Longshore says, so it's 18. We're back to Lee versus Grant here. So it's 1864, and both sides are digging trenches. So the overland there was some of that in the overland campaign, but there's also some maneuver as well. So it's kind of I don't want to say that it's the end of the maneuver phase of the Civil War. I think that would be an overstatement, but it's you start to see that in that campaign. Jeff Beeler mentions that the Lee versus Grant played scenario that he played had very few counters in it, and that is pretty typical of great campaigns in the American Civil War as well, too, because you have basically a leader stacked with a strength counter that moves around the map, right? So you don't necessarily need a lot of counters to do that. The lowest ranked of the fleet games. This is a series of games by Joe Balkowski, Modern Naval Combat. Okay, and these are a series that are very highly regarded nowadays. Not a topic that particularly interests me, and I think these go for decent cabbage. So not games that I would run to pick up, but the maps are okay. I mean, this is a naval game, right? So bear in mind that you're not going to get a lot of land detail here. But I think the maps are okay for what they are. I think the counters are okay for what they are. There are larger counters too, by the way, unless the fleet games that I've owned in the past were different. I don't think they were. Nope, they're bigger than average. That's about a 5/8 inch counter. Without, don't know that I have one of these handy to measure. And I don't know that I would if I did, but they look like roughly 50 5/8 inch counters. I guess we'll call it the Panzerblitz style counter sheets, actually. But these games are supposed to be very good for what they are. I'm not a big modern hypothetical guy. If I'm going to do something like this, I am probably going to play Command Modern Operations on the computer, but um, so I'm not super motivated to run these copies down from Victory games from the 80s. Let me put it that way. That said, a redo of this series is in the pipeline at Compass as well, and I'd probably get on that train if whenever that shows up. I think it's a schedule alignment question is why it's still in the pipeline, but it was announced quite a while ago. Eric from Eric's Table Napoleonic Battles is here in the chat. Eric, send me a link to your Discord. I will send you a link to my Discord. Noble Knight Games for 265 for Fifth Fleet. Geek Market has 0 copies. Possibly that's why Noble Knight is selling it at 265. Third Fleet, next in not next chronologically, but next in the rankings. This is so the previous one was the Indian Ocean. This is North Pacific, Caribbean, and Atlantic Oceans, which is a let's say geographically scattered set of situations. This is not the original map. I'm trying to find a picture of the original map. Here's a guy trying to put the entire series together, which is bold. I gotta give props to this individual. The best tool to clean to deal with that is buy it unpunched and cut the counters out with a craft knife or a utility knife or whatever. That's basically the only scenario in which I will, if I know it's center punched anyway. I will only buy it unpunched. This is why I only buy unpunched Avalon Hill stuff. Although I did buy a punch copy of Blackbeard because that was like a game I'd had on the wish list for years, and I finally found it at a good price. And it was, it was punched, but that I don't mind so much. So Third Fleet, I want to say the whole series is by Joe Balkowski, art by Charlie Kibler. Um, Counters, as we can see, again, they're not too bad. Let's actually get a decent shot of the counters here. There we go. Ah, we've got two different sizes of counters here. That's interesting. Okay, that I don't remember, but it's been a long time. So these are half-inch counters, and these are just looks like all markers. And then these are the actual combat assets, which are on 5/8 inch counters. And as you can see, like the NATO units are in these green borders, and the other units will be, in a different color. Let me put it that way. Uh, Even got some Portuguese units here. All right, next up, the Peloponnesian War. Um, Not a lot of games on this at this or a similar scale. There's a couple. There's Polis, which is a Euro style game, so I don't know that we want to count that. I have you had bad luck using a rotary counter for counters. I have rolled right over the clean over the counter with it too many times. I use a utility knife. I have not. I've cut myself using the utility knife. I'm not sure I've miscut the counters. So Peloponnesian War. This is a Mark Herman game redone by GMT relatively recently. It is a very interesting solitaire game. The new version from GMT at least has a two-player variant. I'm not sure that the original did. It may have, but I don't remember it from the original. But the original was not in my hands for very long, and it was a while ago. As opposed to the updated version of GMT's Peloponnesian War. The map is also this is the original map, and frankly, I think there's some readability. I mean, at least in this photograph, I think it's a decent looking map as far as just appearance and aesthetics go. But Brian Jarvis says the smaller the rotary cutter, the easier it is to keep on track. That's probably true. Mine is like one of the ones that's about I don't know 2 inches or something like that. This is it's a point to point map. If I haven't, I have said that it is already. I've already said that it's a solitaire game, and it's a very interesting mechanism whereby the player is forced to change sides if they're doing well but not quite well enough to win. And that's a super interesting mechanic that I don't know has been used anywhere else. Is Mark Mahaffey the map artist on this? I asked that because here's Mark posting this. So apparently not. What apparently wasn't Mark Mahaffey. Um, Mark said it was done by Ted Kohler, and if Mark doesn't know, I don't know who would, right? So the GMT map. Let's see if we can find the GMT version of this map. Uh, if you're going to get this, get the GMT version. It's a lot more readable. You'll look at this map and you'll see that the points in the point to point map stand out way better. The original map I think is aesthetically pleasing, but it's got readability issues. The redone map, although some of these locations are a little harder to see, generally is a lot better. And obviously the component quality is really good too. Very interesting game. I don't know that I would recommend this for a two-player experience, but if you love it solitaire and you want to introduce it to somebody else, by all means, that would be a good reason to do that. Um, we'll talk about the new rounding tool too shortly. So next up is another very well regarded game. Everything that we talk about now has a significant and vocal fan base. This is Tokyo Express. This is a solitaire game about the Guadalcanal campaign by John Southard. This is on my shelf. I haven't played it. I haven't had it that long. I've had it for 3, maybe 4 years now. Sounds right. But very interesting looking game. Decent production values too. The map looks decent. Apparently, this is Ted Color. Come on. Here, of course, you got Savo Island, Guadalcanal itself. Um, you'll have a naval battle around here, right? Um, and then when you look at the counters, I think the play aids are quite clean looking, really, for a game of this is a relatively complicated game. Let me put it that way. Weight, according to BGG, is 4.02 out of 5. I have even less. I think that the amount of information content in the BGG weight rating is less than the amount of information content in the other ratings available on BGG. Let me put it that way. Alistair Logie cut himself on the rotary cutter. I have also cut myself on the rotary cutter. I don't use it very much, to be completely honest. I think it's an imprecise tool, and I don't particularly like it. This is a classic. Now, Compass is working on a new version of this. They have several John Southard projects in the pipeline, and this is one. This is in the pipeline after the new Carrier game. Which is also a John Southard design, by the way, but very highly regarded. I want to get a shot of the counters here, and I think we're going to find when we look at them, you can see that the ships, they're not 1 inch by 1/2 inch counters, but they're like 1/2 by 3/4 inch counters. I like that from an aesthetic standpoint for a game about World War II naval stuff to have the ships on rectangular counters, and they're not super duper rectangular, but they're more rectangular than they could be. So they're not squares. I just like that aesthetically. Um, Very positively regarded game, still has a very high reputation. Next up is NATO, the next war in Europe. Designer here, Richard J. Trupp. I don't know who that is. Bruce Maxwell, as far as I know, was the only designer, but hey, let me know if I'm wrong. I don't own and have never owned the original. 1983 release, pretty nice cover, I gotta say. Ted Kohler, apparently the cover artist. Very striking cover, too, let me put it that way. And as per Bruce, this was the first game that Victory Games released. Apparently, Bruce himself was not particular, and you can watch my interview with Bruce about the new version of NATO, where he talks about this, or any of the other million interviews that Bruce did about it. But this is Bruce was not happy with it. Let me put it that way. Despite Bruce not being happy with it, a lot of people loved this back in the 80s. I can vouch for that. The new version from Compass, which is up for several Charles S. Roberts awards, we'll see if it wins any, is, I think, I won't say a complete redesign, but it is a substantial redesign. A lot is different between this and the old one. It did run a bit late, and I am going to give Bruce the credit for that, because I think Bruce made absolutely sure that there is a little bit of counter errata, by the way, but it's nothing alarming particularly. And you can ask Compass for the errata counter sheet too. But this game is pretty highly polished despite that small amount of errata. The rulebook is excellent. It is clear. It is verbose, but it is one of those verbose rule books that is verbose in a good way. We played, I never played the original, but I played the new one almost as soon as it hit the mailbox. And we had a great experience with it. Very little in that rule. Now, we had to continually refresh ourselves on certain rules because we're old and kind of dumb now. But there was never an example of a rule we just had trouble finding in that rule book. It is very clear. The original is supposed to be good. I have to think that the new one is better. And frankly, I have to think that that's why the new one is up for a bunch of Charles S. Roberts awards, because it really is very good. Next up is Seventh Fleet, credited to Joe Belkowski, according to BGG. Apparently, Hobby Japan did a version. Is there a picture of that? I'd be curious to see a picture of that. They didn't do a picture of that on BGG. Another one of the Fleet series. This is the Far East, so you can see Japan in here. So this is, Western Pacific type of stuff, and China Sea, with the Philippines as well, and a decent number of. Is this 4 maps? Looks like it's 3 maps. Decent number of off-map displays too, so decent footprint on this thing. Looking at, yeah, that's not there. Somebody in Canada is selling a very good copy for $60. That ain't bad. Noble Knight wants 145. Not checking condition on Noble Knight on this. Here's Sixth Fleet. I want to say this is the first one they're redoing. This is Modern Naval Combat in the Med, and I can tell you that this is the one that I had in the series. So, figure out where these counters are going here. Yeah, and Bruce is working on Aaron Armor, his design for West End, and that's. I don't want to talk to Bruce about it because then I will be excited about it because that's the kind of guy Bruce is, and then I will want to buy it, and I'll have another modern hypothetical game that I don't want. But Sixth Fleet is, I don't know if it's the highest rated one. No, it is not. It might have the nicest map. I think that's possible. I think that's a pretty nice map. Nope, this is somebody's redone map for Sixth Fleet. So I don't know that the original was quite that nice. Nice job, whoever redid that. I gotta say, it looks like it could be a map from the period, but better, right? This isn't a bad looking map though. Same type of counters, 5/8-inch counters with half-inch markers. Anything like S&T Sixth Fleet? I would assume that the answer to that is no. I'm reasonably confident that the answer to that is no. Next up, and we are on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is number 11. This is across 5 Aprils. And this is the predecessor to the Battle Hymn series that is available from Compass with one volume out, Shiloh and P Ridge, and Gettysburg and P Ridge. And then the next one is Shiloh and I forget what the other battle in volume 2 is. But that should be coming along soonish. This is an Eric Lee Smith design. Again, very influential designer. Charles Kibler is credited as the artist here. If we look at between Battle Hymn and Across 5 Aprils, this would be a very interesting comparison. So I would call this kind of an unusual. The map on the right is the Across 5 Aprils map, and it's got 5 battles in it, by the way. And that's, I assume, why it's called that. And I believe each battle is in a different year. You'll notice that that's, I think, a little bit of an interestingly different map for Victory Games. It doesn't really look like a lot of other Victory Games maps. On the other hand, the Battle Hymn map is done in an obviously completely different style. Now, I'll mention again, and I've mentioned this a lot, but I'll say it again. So the Battle Hymn Gettysburg and P Ridge game from Compass has a computer game version that preceded it. It is called Gettysburg: The Tide Turns, and unless the price has changed or I'm misremembering it, both of which are possible, it was $10 suggested retail on Steam, which means I got it for maybe $5. Might have been cheaper than that. And it's quite good. I actually liked it quite a bit. It's from Shenandoah Studios, who've done a number of very interesting things from designers like Eric Lee Smith and John Butterfield, who have a lot of cred in the tabletop wargaming space as well. So it's quite a decent game. I think for me, the scale level wasn't right. But I'm talking about Battle Hymn, right? Less so about Gettysburg. But the concerns with Gettysburg will be pretty similar because the scale is very similar as well. I managed to avoid buying anything on eBay. This is the game most likely to get me demonetized in 2022. This is Hell's Highway from John Butterfield. This is a game about Operation Market Garden. I can't get the fucking swastikas off the screen. It's a 2-map game. Really kind of 1.5 is what it looks like. About Operation Market Garden. And it is a game that I think generally holds up quite well, except in one regard, and that is the counters, which are horrific. So these are the counters with a bunch of information on them, tiny symbols, even tinier than the other weirdly tiny NATO symbols that we've seen, and everything else is super tiny as well. Now there's like a redone counters that you can, I do not know where you can get those. If anybody knows, please say it in the chat. That was communicated on Consum World at one point, and those may be still available. I don't know. They are a lot nicer if you can get those. These are the reason I don't want to play my copy of this game. The game is supposed to be quite good. Um, I have been told that it is highly dependent on the outcome of a small number of dice rolls, which generally indicates a design problem. But in this case, it might not because it's Market Garden, and that happened, right? The San River Bridge doesn't blow up, and the complexion of the battle could have been completely different. Alistair says that Matrix Games has Gettysburg the Tide Turns for $4.90 in their sale. And like I said, it's pretty good. I mean, Roger, you may have far better eyesight than I do, and I mean, you may have seen these back in the '80s when I had far better eyesight. That wasn't that good, but it was better than it is now. And I think these are very close to unreadable. As Mark mentions here, there is a redo of this game in the works. I don't want to use the word reprint. I'm not sure that's not accurate, but there's a new version coming from New England Simulations. I don't have a timetable on that. If Marty Sample's here, he will say what the timetable looks like because he knows. Robert O says he thought the counters were fine back in the day. I mean, modern standards is a factor in people saying stuff like that nowadays, right? And I, play a fair amount of stuff with small stuff on the counters these days. But I flatly would not want to play with this counter set. The game might be great, and you get the replacement counters and you won't have a problem. But I think there's too much information that's too small, too packed into the center of the counter here. And there's stuff in the back's even worse. Jesus, look at this. I mean, there is only one real number here in the unit designation, so it's not like there's that much information. But the NATO symbols are just so small. Even the NATO symbols are hard to read, and that's something that shouldn't really ever happen, I think. Marty says that the new version is not a reprint. It has a fair number of changes, but the essence of the original will remain. Okay, so there you go. And I'm not surprised. John Butterfield's done a lot of stuff between now and then, so it wouldn't surprise me if his thinking on it had changed. I have seen pictures of it on a playtest table at I mean, I wasn't there, but I saw somebody else's pictures of it on a table being playtested, I believe, at last year's Consum World Expo. Marty Sample says winner's victory goes out the door first. Marty, if you say 2024, does that mean Hell's Highway or winner's victory? Is that coming in 2023? Do you know that? Can you give us a date on that, or an approximate date, or to the hour? That would be fine too. I also think that the AH-1914 counters are suffer a little bit in readability. I don't think they're that bad. I think there's more serious problems with that game. Let me put it that way. But I think that game also has some really interesting things in it based on its age. Next up is Carrier from once again John Southard. This is Southwest Pacific. So let's look at the map. We definitely got oh wow, look at this. Somebody redid the map. And it looks like they did a very nice job. Wonder if their files are available. Yeah, this is a nice looking map, I gotta say. So we've got Solomon's down here. You see the tip of New Guinea down there. Just same general area as your, Guadalcanal campaign, Coral Sea, that type of stuff. Does it tell us here? Apparently, there's a link to the rule book here on BGG. Now, this goes for decent change. Noble Knight has it starting at 190. eBay has it starting at 300. You can get a new copy from somebody on Board Game Geek for $130, apparently. So Vince Reese says that was Gary Crockover that redid the map. Marty says that Winner's Victory pre-pub should go up in the next month or so. He's proofing counters. The boxes are already done. I mean, nobody's concerned about a typo on the box, right? So, and Doug's clipping this right now. I am very excited about, now it's going to be solitaire, right? It's a solitaire system. and despite my decision to not really do any more solitaire stuff, I didn't really say no more solitaire stuff. I just decided that there was some solitaire stuff that I had that I wasn't going to get to the table. I don't need to play solitaire games. So there are some that I am keeping and some that I am unloading. This is one that I would actually acquire whenever the new one comes out from Compass. I don't have this one. Marty says, and he's guessing mid spring 2023 for Winter's Victory. That's the hotly anticipated ILAO game from New England Simulations. Trying to catch up a little bit on the chat here. All right, so next up is Pax Britannica. This is a game by Greg Kostikian, who is a name that is familiar to both wargamers and role players. And to wargamers today, he might be most famous for being wrong when he pronounced wargaming dead. But as we recently talked about on Twitter, I think it's very easy to see how Greg arrived at that conclusion at the time. This is Pax Britannica. It is a game about colonialism, right? I mean, that's what it's about. It's about colonialism. And the objective of the game is to end up with the most money, which is not a uncharacteristic for colonialism, right? So we got an extra counter here that I didn't get because it was lost in the large pile of clippings. I've played this. It's quite bookkeepy. I don't mind bookkeepy personally. I don't necessarily enjoy bookkeeping when I'm playing a 5-hour game after playing a 12-hour game on the same day. That might be a bit much to ask at that point without a large nap occurring between the two. But it's an interestingly designed game that I think would not be designed the way it is today. I'm not even talking about the social angle which would be different today. I'm talking about the mechanics. I think this would not be designed mechanically this way today. Hey, Brant, you should check your email. I'm just saying. Thanks, Brant, for coming by. Next up from Pax Britannica, I think I said Pants Britannica, is Battle Hymn. This is the Pacific version of Victory's attempts to keep replicating the ambush magic. And this once again says it's inspired right in the blurb says it's inspired by ambush, which doesn't surprise us in any way. And in this case, you get Marines on a map that is maybe less ugly, maybe a little. So if you want the ambush Pacific module, this is pretty much it. So now this goes for Noble Knight has one for 85. That doesn't sound too bad to me. It's less highly sought after than ambush itself, which you'll notice we still haven't gotten to. But it is not a game that goes really really cheap either, like 1809, which makes no sense, or Omaha Beachhead. I mean, Omaha Beachhead, you can at least blame the map, but the 1809 map's not that bad. Pat Mullen mentioned earlier Korean War. This is number 6 on BGG's ranking. If anything, I feel like this should be higher than it is. I would personally put it above the Fleet games, but that's a recognition of different interest levels of mine. This is Vicky. Thanks for stopping by. Much appreciated. And Matt Davidson, if I haven't said hi yet, glad to have you here. Yeah, and I think that Decision was talking about. I mean, they talk about a lot of reprints that don't end up happening. Let me put it that way. So this has been redone by Compass too. In that case, it is substantially the same game. There may be a relatively minor amount of cleanup. Other than that, it's all about the component upgrade. I know that. So the original is a 2. Now I've played the original. Okay, in this case, I have the Compass version, but have not played the Compass version. But it's the same game for the most part. The original game is a 2-map game, right? And as was pretty typical for Victory games, for a lot of their games, there's exceptions to this. There's not that much off-map stuff, and I don't really remember much in the way of off-map stuff for this. this is, I think, the definitive simulation of the Korean War at this scale, right? Um, if you really love OCS, you'll enjoy OCS Korea. It is an excellent game. This gives you a lot of the political and international elements that something like an OCS Korea or a Holdfast Korea or something like that are just not going to be able to include. It is a reasonably complicated game, but we didn't find it overwhelming by any means. It's Joe Balkowski design as well. The criticisms of the Compass Games version, there are basically two, and neither of them have anything to do with the game. Roger Hemseth, thanks for stopping by. It's component issues. One is the complaint that it's now 4 maps instead of 2 maps, which is true. It's 4 maps now instead of 2 maps. So some people that were able to fit it on their tables before can't fit it on their tables now with the new version. That's a legitimate thing. That's a valid reason, I think, to prefer one edition of it over the other. The other issue that it had was the counters. I think I don't remember actually hearing this, so maybe I've inferred it and nobody's contradicted me yet. That's possible. I believe Compass was experimenting with a new counter printer at the time, and they printed really thick counters that were aligned horribly. So a lot of people's copies, when they got this thing, ended up with severe misalignment problems on the counters. Now, if you wrote Compass and you said, "Hey, I got this problem," and I did, because I got one of those counter sheets. They sent me new counter sheets, right? Some people got the apparently they had another print run of counter sheets and they started sending those out as well. They were thinner, but they didn't have the massive registration problems such as one that would have found in the days of SPI. Enough that like vital information would be lopped off the counter and they were just not usable. Not a small aesthetic nitpick that you were making because you were having a bad day and got yelled at work. These were like legitimately unusable counters. At least mine were. Compass fixed them. Some people got the thinner counters, and as long as they got 3 sheets of thinner counters, it had 3 counter sheets. I don't really see a problem with that. The thinner counters weren't like paper thin or anything. They just weren't crazy thick like the originally shipped counters in this thing were, that way. This is a game that, again, I think, in part because few have tried, but one of the reasons why few have tried is that this game did it so well. Not a light game, not particularly introductory game, but it is the definitive Korean War game if you want to kind of model as many aspects of that conflict as you can. An OCS Korea really just gives you the military stuff with some special rules to reflect the politics. Now that super duper thick counter stuff was the same stock that I got in my copy of Russia Besieged, and it did not have registration problems in Russia Besieged. There was no way I could get it in any of my clippers. So I ended up using the Ares counter jig, which I owe somebody a video on, by the way, to make that happen. Second Fleet, Joe Balkowski, modern naval combat in the North Atlantic. Once again, reasonably decent looking map, kind of centered on Iceland. But you're not getting a lot of land detail here either. Modern at the time, so modern hypothetical. Other than that counter issue, and assuming you have the space to set up 4 maps, I would recommend the Compass version over the Victory Games version because of the better component quality. Because frankly, it's just better. Other than those 2 things, which are in fact component quality problems. Next up is another one of those games that is in the same space for Vietnam as Joe Balkowski's Korea is for Korea. This is it's sort of an operational and strategic simulation of the Vietnam War. I've played a couple of the smaller scenarios. There's video on that back in the history of the channel. This was redone by GMT in an edition that fixed a very small number of pretty small things and otherwise reprinted the original verbatim. And incorporated errata and stuff like that, right? But they intentionally set out to not make a lot of changes to the game. They made a couple of minor tweaks and put the errata in, and basically otherwise redid it. It's a very nice rendition of the Victory Games Vietnam. Was released in early 2022, by the way. So this is the definitive game about Vietnam at its scale. There are some good tactical Vietnam games. There are a couple of good operational Vietnam games, but nothing at this scale. And this has a fair number of scenarios, but you can also play the entire 1965 to 1975 period in it. And if you do, it will take a long time. But you will have, and there's like a player personality thing going on here too. Like some people are not going to enjoy the dynamic of this game, and I think that's fair to say that. Okay, so we're being clear here. The Compass Vietnam game. The Compass has two Vietnam games that I could think of off the top of my head right now. One is Hearts and Minds, which is a completely different thing, and which is a much simpler and more abstract game. I had it; it was not my thing. The other Compass Vietnam game is Vietnam Rumor of War by Adam Starkweather. That is part of the OSS system. That has nothing to do with the Victory Games Vietnam. The new edition of the Victory Games Vietnam, I think this was just a typo on Alistair's Perfidious Albion's part, so I don't want to pick on you. The new version of this game is the one from GMT. This is in a really similar space to the next game we're going to talk about, Pacific War, in that I think it's an outstanding game and the pinnacle of game design that do this. But I don't necessarily recommend it because it really requires that you have a very strong and passionate interest in wargaming, this topic specifically, because there's so much going on here, and it's such a project to play the whole thing, and you won't get the whole experience if you don't play the whole thing, or at least a good chunk of it. That it's hard to recommend based on that. But oh no, this is not solo friendly at all. Can you solo it? Sure. You're going to be losing a lot. There's a substantial, as you would expect, there's a substantial amount of hidden information in this. Okay. Silver Bayonet was reprinted just a few years ago as a 20th anniversary edition, and it's very nice. I believe I have an unboxing of it. So it shouldn't be that hard to get a copy of Silver Bayonet if you want a copy of Silver Bayonet. I mean, the fact that this isn't solo friendly is true of every edition of this game. If you fall into that category, though, where you really want this definitive simulation of Vietnam from in this period, and remember that what we call the Vietnam War roughly runs from 65 to 75, but the actual conflict lasted longer than that, right? So if you want the game on this subject, this is the game. Vietnam or Fire in the Lake? Jesus, yes, that is absolutely that's apples and cannonballs, right? I like Fire in the Lake a lot, actually. I think it's very good. And for somebody that's interested in Vietnam as a topic but doesn't want to deal with this, I might point them to Fire in the Lake. I think it's an easy game to recommend. It's complicated by coin standards, but it's not that complicated. You can play it in a sitting easily. This thing will take you a minimum of 6 months to play through, and probably longer than that. I would recommend both games. I think they're both very good. Mark says that the old Victory Insider had a two-part piece on Vietnam soloed by Tony Curtis. Like I said, you can solo it. It's just that you're losing a lot if you do, which I think is true of a lot of solitaire games that are played solitaire, but not designed to be played solitaire as such. But that's less true than it used to be, because even the non-solitaire games, generally there's some kind of consideration made for people who are going to solo it. There's plenty of two-player games or two-side games that solo fine too. All right, Pacific War. So this is, I think there's like there's like a the ultimate right at the top. I think ambush is kind of in its own category. Number one is ambush. We'll talk about number four in the sort of pinnacle victory games catalog next here, and that's Eric Lee Smith's Civil War. Um, there's really not a lot that's comparable to this. It is fundamentally an operational game that scales all the way down to the individual battles, which I don't think will keep anybody occupied for too long, um, up to the campaigns, all the way through the campaigns, all the way to doing the entire Pacific War. Okay. Um, and it is filled with deep thoughts and clever mechanics. But it has a lot going on. It is pretty high complexity. It is, I don't think it's like the maximum complexity, but it's pretty high complexity. It is a challenge to learn this game. I don't think I am going to say I'm alone in having felt challenged. That said, it's not impossible. You just got to kind of stick with it and kind of play your way through the scenarios. And I think I think we would have had a faster job at it had we played fewer engagement in battle scenarios and tried to move up to the campaign scenarios as soon as we felt comfortable. Don't let the battle and campaign scenarios overstay their welcome if you are learning this. It is a long and difficult rule book that requires close reading. That is not weird for Mark Herman games. So, bear that in mind too. Except, I mean, it's not lesser of Empire of the Sun, but Empire of the Sun's rulebook is half the size. It's probably bigger than that. But I had less of a hard time. This is another insipid statement. Yes, I had less of a hard time learning Empire of the Sun than this, but this is a lot more complicated than Empire of the Sun. You can definitely sort of see the sort of philosophical progression here from Pacific War to Empire of the Sun. And like, if you're really interested in this topic but don't want to deal with all this complexity and overhead, I would recommend Fire in the Lake about Vietnam. I would unhesitatingly recommend Empire of the Sun to people who felt the same way about the Pacific War. I do not, however, wish to oversell the differences between this and Pacific War. Pacific War is a strategic game, and it's designed from the ground up to be a strategic game. The games are, like I said, that there are philosophical similarities in them, and I think there are, and I think you'll see those if you've played both games. But mechanically, they're not particularly close to one another. You'll see a couple of things, but generally, mechanically, they're quite different games, as they should be, because they are at quite different scales. So, if you're interested in this topic and really want a solid and exceptionally meaty Pacific War game, take it by all means. Look at Pacific War, but Pacific War will basically let you play the whole war out operationally. In which case, you have just an absolute head melting amount of shit to keep track of in your head. And not only your shit, but the other person's shit too, because they've got all kinds of hidden information. All the information's basically hidden in this thing. You don't know what's in those task forces. You have to send planes out to find them. So, it's a lot. There's a lot going on here. I recommend lingering in the campaign scenarios as long as possible. The Guadalcanal campaign scenario is quite straightforward, and I think is the one to start with, even though it's not the first one. The battle scenarios are all okay, but if you really want to understand the game, then you need to move on as quickly as you can to the campaign scenario. There are mechanical differences between the Victory Games original and the GMT Games update. The biggest, I think, there's some relatively minor presentational changes. The rulebook's been completely rewritten. There's some relatively minor presentational changes as well, like the fact that the twin engine planes are just now called tactical planes, right? And you don't have to worry about the number of engines. The single engine planes are now called fighters, right? It's just more straightforward terminology. So there's some stuff like that. The submarine rules are completely redone, and some people have reported them as broken. But I also wonder because we thought they were broken too until we were realized we were doing it wrong. So, and then once we figured that out, it seemed less broken. So, it is a rule book, as the fiery threads on Board Game Geek can attest. It is frankly a challenging rule book because it's a pretty complicated game. It requires you to read closely. It requires you to sometimes infer the answer that's in there. And it's there. It's there. You just have to kind of if you put the two rules together, it will make sense. Um, Even if reading one of those rules, each of those rules independently didn't make sense. Um, Fred Serval and I did. Congratulations, Fred, by the way, if I didn't say that earlier. Did a teach and play series with Mark on Fred's channel, so go check that out. It's called Homo Ludens, or Homo Luden, I guess is how you would say it in French, but that's how we say it here in Ohio. But it was great. We had a great time. It was very informative, and it's always easier to learn the game when the designer's sitting right there too, right? Although I think we did okay. Even the fact that Mark was there surely helped, but we got through it, and Fred hadn't played it at that point, but I had. So um this Nunez says Battle Hymn 2 may be canceled. So that was not the case. We're aware it's late. Like very late. But that was not a statement that they gave us at Compass Expo at about a month ago. Yeah, just about a month ago. So there's a decent number of games on the Pacific War at this point, and really the only one vaguely comparable to Pacific War is um War in the Pacific from either SPI or Decision Games. I think the Decision Games version is a mistake, and I haven't played it, so take that for what it's worth. There are people that like it. I think it is a mistake. I think it was misdesigned and underplay tested. Um, Underplay tested might be inevitable in a game that size because it's like takes War in the Pacific and gets even bigger. But I think that the original SPI game is a more interesting design and a more playable game. More playable is relative here, right? It's not super playable, but there are smaller scenarios that you can play as well. But we're trying to talk about Pacific War here, and we're going to run just a couple minutes over. So sorry about that. Sorry if I'm stepping on Eric and his Labette stream or whatever he's doing. I believe he's doing BAR tonight. Oops. Try and get some of these into the tray here for change. It looks like we're going to make it. Some of these compartments are a bit tight, but it looks like we're going to make it in terms of getting everything into one tray or half a tray. Half a tray. Yeah, Mark was like doing the whole chess Bobby Fischer thing where he was playing 6 people or whatever it was, multiple people in Pacific War. Nobody could do that but Mark Herman. Doesn't matter what the game is. I think so. If you're going to get Pacific War, you could probably get a Victory Games Pacific War pretty inexpensively. But the GMT versions in print, it's certainly a huge, huge component upgrade. So if you're interested, I would recommend the GMT version. On the other hand, it's possible to fit all the counters for the Victory Games version in the box. Now, I set up some scenarios for the original because I was that excited about the redo, and man, it took forever to set those scenarios up, and that had a huge impact on how I then went and organized the GMT version when it came out. So you can absolutely fit all the counters for either version of the game in the box it comes in. Maybe the organization will not be optimal. My organization is as close to optimal as I can get. Mark did a very nice unboxing of it. Actually, you're absolutely right. Mark was the first unboxing of it because it was like the proof copy. But and it's a beautifully produced game. It's got tons of nice components. the small um, sort of action scenario map that's included is a amazingly great idea because you could play so many of the campaign games on that um, on that small map. You can't play them all, but you can play a lot of them, and that's worth a lot. Those bead counter trays, which are linked in my video about Lavatai, actually, are on sale at Michael's right now. It's not the same make and model I was using before, but they're pretty close. They're on sale for 5.49 or something like that. I went to Michael's yesterday; they were out of them. So best of luck. Hopefully they'll be at your Michaels, even though the internet said they had them, they did not have them. So I'm not sure what the second game I'm gonna do in this tray is because I think now that I'm looking at it, I'm not gonna quite be able to get all these in 10 compartments, but I got them in 12. I could get them in 11. I'll put these here. I can get them in 10. We're gonna do it. It's gonna be okay. So if you want those bead trays, those are the same trays. I don't show them in that video, but if you watch my World in Flames storage solutions video, you will see those bead trays there. Next up, in the interest of getting us to the end of the show, we have once again Victory Games doing what was for many years considered the definitive game on the American Civil War. This is it. Eric Lee Smith's Civil War. I think this still holds up very well. That said, of those four, it's the one with the most competition, the most other games in that space that I think can favorably be compared to it, even if it ends up on top at the end of the day. War for the Union is one. I think that's a decent looking game. I think the Mark Simonich U.S. Civil War I think, does everything important that this game does, but does it in a much more streamlined and fast playing way. With one exception, which is the leader mechanism, which I would really love to have an set of optional rules to give me randomized leaders. Would that add playtime? It would. But it would be an option, right? You could do it if you wanted. And I'm not sure why nobody's done that. No, not even a fan has done that. This is a really good game. I have playthrough content of this as well, so go check that out if you're interested. This is a very strong game. I think it covers more than it needs to. I think it covers the naval in more details than it needs to. I think it's got that Western map, which is optional. You don't have to use it. And frankly, I don't think it's worth your time to do so because there's not really the Civil War was not decided in the Oklahoma Panhandle, right? We in our game, and you can see this. Grant gets killed on his first day out. Lee gets killed later on. So the interesting leadership situation looks like Nathaniel Lyon and William Sherman for the Union versus Stonewall Jackson for the Confederacy. It turned out to be fairly interesting, right? See, I can understand why people don't like the random leaders, right? I can also understand why people do like the random leaders, and that's why I'd like to see an option for it. So you could play with that if you wanted. If you didn't want it, you could play with the scripted leaders, which is what U.S. Civil War has. Um, the I just I'd like to have the option. Let me put it that way. And there's a couple. Lee Hanna, thanks for stopping by. Um, the old soldiers' home in Indianapolis was for the crappy Union generals, and that's specifically, if you read the designer's notes in U.S. Civil War, that's specifically the thing that he was trying to prevent with the scripted leaders situation. You end up having to use the leaders that you got because that's what you got. I mean, you do that in the Victory Games Civil War too. I think that there's a number of very strong contenders for this top spot. Even if this ends up on top at the end. That's really not true of Pacific War or of the Vietnam War game or of the Korean War game. There are other games on those subjects, but they are trying to accomplish a lot less than those games did. This game tried to accomplish a lot, but there have been some really credible efforts elsewhere as well. And there's optional leader rules for Victory Games Civil War 2. Let me mention. that are I forget exactly what's core and what's optional, but it will absolutely change the game. You're absolutely right. All right, we're going to wrap up with number one is Ambush from John Butterfield, and the credits here say Eric Lee Smith and John Butterfield. I don't own Ambush. I'm not going to own Ambush, so I don't know if who did what in this collaboration. This is a classic game. It is a solitaire World War II game that is, has been who's again kind of a game that's been difficult to kind of replicate the experience of and by anybody else. That's an interesting thing to observe when you look at the catalog holistically from Victory Games is that they not every Victory Games is an amazing masterpiece, but they did a lot of really strong games. A lot of those really strong games were very influential, and those designers then took those ideas forward from there, like in the case of Lee versus Grant, Joe Balkowski leading that into great campaigns of the American Civil War. And in other places, that creativity turned into kind of dead ends, as in the case of Pacific War. Nothing's really trying to do what Pacific War did. Again, there's games in that space that are even comparable or bigger in scale, but they don't show you all the same things. They don't have the unique mechanisms of Pacific War. Um, so Victory Games was pretty remarkable from a design standpoint. I know we started off with the hilarious sex games, but the end of the show here, this is all pretty groggy stuff. We're not talking about equivalent games to Twilight Struggle. That was like number 32 on the list. All these top games are very groggy games. You can see Ambush's rating is really high too. The rank and rating are really high. Does this hold up quite as well as people think it does? I don't know, but people think it does. So I'm not saying I'm right and they're wrong. You can definitely get a lot of replay value out of this. And if somebody were to redo, I know some folks have said that combat from Compass is kind of an attempt to bring Ambush into the modern age. And looking at the two, I don't think they're similar broadly, but I don't think they're really that similar, right? We got to talk to Mark about getting the Dr. Root sex game reprinted. You know what? If you had a game about this, I think you could do something interesting with that. If you have a game about the whole Civil War and you have a whole map that's Oklahoma, I mean, that seems like an interesting. That seems unnecessary. Let me put it that way. So obscured leader quality. So this sounds rather similar to the optional leader rules from Victory Games. Civil War, and for that matter, sounds a little similar to the optional leader rules, which I think were inspired by the other optional leader rules for SPI's War Between the States, which is another game that I think is comparable to this. Frank, I think this is a flatly better game than War Between the States. But War Between the States has some really neat ideas in it too. There's some cool stuff in there, and I think it's just kind of hampered by its size, to be honest. Oh my god. Oh, you guys are killing me with the Dr. Root stuff. The Dr. Root stuff is back. Albert Hubner, thanks for subscribing. Much appreciated. I got to get that back on oh, it does. It comes up, but if it comes up like this, then it's oops, let's not do that. No, let's not exit. But it doesn't come up on the StreamYard screen. We'll fix that at some point. The New Mexico game could be an interesting game, but if you do a game on it, that's what it's got to be about, not about you're going from Gettysburg to New Mexico. Then that's where I think you may have, I don't want to say strayed from the path, because again, I think that Civil War game is an extremely strong game. And there is a new free traveler module from Mongoose Publishing. We're going to wrap up here. I forget what it's called because I haven't downloaded it yet, but you can get it on Drive Through RPG. It's a PDF. Right at the beginning of the show, we will announce the CSR winners before the end of the year is the plan. So we're talking, what is that, 3 weeks, something like that. Yeah, but more or less 3 weeks. It's exactly 3 weeks actually. So yeah, it'll be soon. We are putting that together right now. New traveler coverage. Honestly, it's been a time thing. I'd love to do more new traveler stuff. Somebody wrote me this proposal about it with another channel that does travel stuff. They want to do this thing together, and I'm like, man, just no way I can do this. I will have an unboxing video this week on Thursday. I don't know what that's going to be yet, but it'll be something. I've got 50 unboxings in the can. There is a stream with Dan tomorrow that is on this channel at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I can hide this now. So I hope everybody has had a good time tonight. I think so. And it looks like we had good numbers as well. We topped out at 146, which I think is pretty strong considering that I did zero social media promotion for this thing tonight, because other stuff was going on today. I had a busy day at work, and then I had to like get off work, make dinner, clean up after dinner, and then get on the phone, talk about ward stuff. So a lot's happening in that department right now, which will become evident soonish. So I would like to wish everybody a great rest of the week, and I will see you all again for the Christmas week stream next Monday at 8 p.m. Everybody have a great day until I see you next time.